US President Joe Biden has returned to Washington, D.C. from a 4-day visit to the Middle East. His trip to Israel, the West Bank and Saudi Arabia, a country which at one point during the presidential campaign he branded a pariah state. It was his maiden trip to the region as president, aimed at reassuring Washington's influence. And there he discussed with other leaders a variety of issues. At the very top of the agenda, as expected, oil, facing pressure from home to push Saudi Arabia to pump more oil to cool down energy prices at home. After bilateral meetings with Saudi leaders, Mr. Biden said he was doing all he could. However, he added that concrete results would not be seen for another couple of weeks. Another major takeaway from the trip, Israel-Saudi normalisation. Riyadh appeared to hand Mr. Biden a victory in that regard, at least at first. The kingdom opened up its airspace for all carriers, even those from Israel, and the president himself took the first historic flight from Tel Aviv to Jeddah. Israel's interim Prime Minister Yair Lapid even claimed this was the first step towards proper normalisation between the two countries. But Saudi Foreign Minister Prince Faisal bin Farhan has dismissed that particular notion. He says the move has nothing to do with Israel, in fact, and Riyadh says it was not in any way a precursor to any further steps. As for all the talk about an Arab NATO, while Saudi Arabia poured cold water on any US hopes for that alliance, Washington does hope, though, that the summit would that a summit would help lay the groundwork for a regional security alliance, one that would include all Arab states and Israel. However, Riyadh warning it's not aware of any such discussions of this Arab-Israel alliance, even adding that the kingdom was not involved in any such talk. So some of those gains minimal, but there were some other setbacks. In fact, the roughest pushback came over Mr. Biden's fist bump that he shared with Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, who US intelligence claimed gave the order to kill Washington Post columnist Jamal Khashoggi in the Saudi consulate in Istanbul in 2018. Biden says that while he did exchange that fist bump with Mohammed bin Salman, he told the Crown Prince to his face that he was responsible for that murder. Saudi Arabia hit back at that comment, bringing up how the United States often tries to impose values on countries by force and how that backfired. He also talked about the killing of Palestinian-American journalist Shireen Abu Akleh, and human rights activists and fellow Democrats have slammed Mr. Biden's meeting with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. For a roundup of that, we're joined by David DeRoche from London, a professor of Near East South Asia, a professor at the Near East South Asia Centre for Strategic Studies. Thank you for joining us, David. I just wonder that now that trip has finished and has wrapped up, what the assessment is as to whether Mr. Biden achieved many of his objectives that he had going into that visit.
Yeah, it's hard to see how the Biden camp can paint this as a victory. There, were newspaper reports that said he was very reluctant to go, that he feared just this sort of outcome, but that the career security officials and Middle East officials in the White House, Brett McGurk and Jake Sullivan, at their forefront, sort of told him, look, you have to go for reasons of state, for reasons of security, that Saudi Arabia is too big a country to let simmer in neglect. But it appears that Biden has alienated his base in the Democratic Party, who, want to see Saudi Arabia a pariah state, and has gotten very little in return. So I think he returns from Riyadh somewhat diminished rather than strengthened.
And particularly his comments that he had face-to-face with Mohammed bin Salman. There seems to be contrasting reports as to the extent to which Mr. Biden was holding him to account for that alleged murder of Jamal Khashoggi. The Saudi Arabian side saying that the words used by Mr. Biden were not particularly harsh. How do you think the US has played that? Do you feel that ultimately Washington could have gone harder in that meeting?
Yeah, well, we don't know for sure, but one Saudi official, Adel al-Jaber, who has been the ambassador in Washington and was probably the most effective ambassador Saudi Arabia has had since Prince Bandar, who had been the ambassador for 22 years. He said that he never heard those words being mentioned. And, he was the personal translator for King Abdullah. He's a man who knows Washington very well. He's a man who knows Saudi Arabia very well. And he's not a man who would speak without the sanction of the senior Saudi leadership. So the fact that he says, I didn't even hear that mentioned, that is about as close to an official refutation as you're going to get from Saudi Arabia. So I think this is going to be a controversy that will run for a while. And again, the left wing of President Biden's own party is already upset with him just for going. So the fact that this is being disputed, I think, once again, undermines the president's narrative.
David Rush, thank you for joining us from the Centre for Strategic Studies.